The rain came down hard on the streets of London, a persistent drizzle that soaked the tourists huddling under their umbrellas and made the grey stone of Buckingham Palace look even more imposing. For one man standing near the gates, the weather was the least of his concerns. He was a member of the Queen's Guard, a unit renowned for its discipline, its immaculate uniforms, and its stoic silence. He had stood watch over the palace for years, his posture rigid, his eyes fixed forward. I trained to ignore the taunts of children and the endless clicking of cameras. But today was different. Today his mind was not on the crowds or the cold. It was on the package he had just seen delivered to the mailroom, a package addressed to the Princess of Wales, Kate Middleton. The guard, whose name was Sergeant James Holloway, had been in the service of the Crown for over a decade. He had seen countless gifts arrive for the royals, extravagant bouquets of flowers, hand-knitted baby booties, and in mountains of fan mail. It was usually a routine affair, a never-ending stream of well-wishes from the public. But this particular package had snagged his attention for a reason he couldn't quite explain. It was small, no bigger than a shoebox, wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. The handwriting on the label was elegant, almost calligraphic, which in itself was not unusual. What bothered him was the feeling that accompanied its arrival, a strange, an inexplicable chill that ran down his spine as he watched the mail clerk carry it inside. He tried to shake it off. He was a professional, a soldier trained to assess threats, not to get spooked by anonymous parcels. But as the morning wore on, the image of that package lingered in his mind. He found himself replaying the moment over and over, the way the light had caught the package, the almost imperceptible weight with which it was carried. It was just a feeling, and a gut instinct honed by years of service. But it was enough. He decided, against all protocol and personal risk, to follow it. He requested a transfer to the Interior Mail Security Detail for the day, a move that raised a few eyebrows among his superiors, but was ultimately granted. He needed to see that package again. He needed to know what was inside. The mailroom in the palace was a surprisingly ordinary place, a stark contrast to the gilded staterooms just a few floors above. It was a hive of activity, filled with the hum of fluorescent lights and the constant thud of parcels being sorted. James reported for duty, trying to appear nonchalant as he scanned the shelves for the plain brown box. When he finally spotted it, sitting innocently among a pile of other items, his heart skipped a beat. It was just as he remembered, unassuming and quiet, but to him, it seemed to hum with a sinister energy. He picked it up. It was heavier than he expected. He held it for a moment, feeling the weight in his hands, and then he made the decision that would change his life. He initialed the log and took it to the secure X-ray room, telling the technician it was a high-priority scan for the princess's protection detail. He had to know what was inside. The X-ray machine was an older model, its screen flickering with a pale green light that cast long shadows in the dim room. James stood behind the technician, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. And the technician, a bored-looking civilian employee named Davies, slid the package onto the conveyor belt. It moved slowly through the machine, disappearing behind the lead-lined curtain. For a moment, the screen was just a mess of static and the faint outlines of the box's structure. Then the image came into focus. Davies leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. James held his breath. On the screen, they could see the distinct shape of a baby's rattle. It was a clear, unmistakable silhouette. But it was what was on the rattle that made the blood drain from James's face. The handle was a solid, dense metal, likely gold, he thought, given the way it absorbed the X-rays. The head of the rattle, however, was a complex, intricate web of tiny, sharp objects. They weren't loose inside, like the bells of a normal rattle. They were set into the surface, a dense constellation of brilliant, shimmering points. Davies whistled softly. That's not your average baby gift," he muttered, pointing to the screen. "Look at those settings. If those are real diamonds, we're looking at a fortune." James stared at the screen, his mind racing. The chill he had felt earlier was now a full-blown ice storm in his veins. He had been right. There was something wrong. But it wasn't a bomb or a biological agent. It was something far more complicated, something that existed in the murky gray area between a generous gift and a potential scandal. But he knew the royal family's strict protocols regarding gifts, especially those of significant monetary value. Accepting such an item, especially for a newborn princess, could be seen as a commercial endorsement, a breach of the impartiality they guarded so fiercely. His duty was clear. He couldn't just let this pass. He had to report it. He instructed Davies to keep the package secure and immediately contacted the palace's private secretary's office. Within the hour, he was sitting in a small, windowless room, facing a stern-faced woman from the Royal Collection Trust and a representative from the Metropolitan Police's Royalty Protection Command. He explained his actions, his initial suspicion, and what the X-ray had revealed. He showed them the image. The room fell silent. The police officer, a man named Inspector Chalmers, looked at the image and then at James. "You did the right thing, Sergeant," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Or this is now a matter for us to handle." James was dismissed, sent back to his regular duties, but with a strict warning not to speak of the incident to anyone. The package, he later learned, was quietly confiscated. The investigation moved with the silent efficiency of a shadow. Inspector Chalmers, a veteran of royal protection who had seen everything from death threats to stalkers, took personal charge of the case. He contacted the sender. It's a high-end New York-based jewelry company called the Natural Sapphire Company, which specialized in creating opulent, one-of-a-kind pieces. The company's representatives were initially ecstatic, believing their gift had finally reached its destination. They explained the gesture was one of gratitude. Years earlier, when Prince William had proposed to Kate Middleton with his mother's iconic sapphire engagement ring, it had inadvertently sparked a global trend. Their sales of sapphire rings, and they claimed, had skyrocketed. The gift, a rattle crafted from 18-karat white gold and encrusted with diamonds, rubies, and sapphires in the pattern of the Union Jack, was their way of saying thank you. The value was staggering. Independent appraisers, brought in by the palace, estimated the piece to be worth in excess of £36,000, or over $45,000. It was a collector's item, a miniature masterpiece of jewelry design. But its very opulence was its downfall. And the royal household's rules on gifts were crystal clear. While personal gifts of a modest nature from friends and family were acceptable, any item of significant financial value, or any gift with a clear commercial intent, had to be refused. To accept it would be to imply royal endorsement of the company, an abuse of their position and a violation of the trust placed in them by the public. The Princess of Wales, known for her meticulous adherence to royal protocol, had no choice. The gift, and as beautiful and well-intentioned as it was, could not be kept. But James Holloway didn't know any of this yet. He was left in the dark, his imagination filling the void with terrifying possibilities. He had seen the X-ray. He had seen the sharp, glittering objects. In the absence of facts, his mind conjured up horrors. Were the diamonds just a distraction? Could they be hiding something else, something more sinister? He spent restless nights replaying the image in his head, and the ghostly outline of the rattle floating in the green glow of the screen. He had potentially saved the princess and her newborn daughter from a commercial scandal, but the secrecy surrounding the case left him feeling hollow. He had done his duty, but it felt incomplete. The story might have ended there, buried in a confidential palace file, lost to the sands of time. But secrets, especially those involving the royal family, have a way of finding the light. 10 years later, On the occasion of Princess Charlotte's 10th birthday, a mention appeared on the jewelry company's website, briefly detailing the story of the magnificent rattle they had created for her. It was a harmless piece of corporate nostalgia, a proud reminder of their craft. But it was spotted by a journalist from The Mirror, a newspaper with a keen eye for royal stories. They reached out to palace sources for confirmation. The response was a carefully worded, a non-denial, denial that essentially confirmed the story's veracity. They would not comment on the specifics of gifts received or refused by the royal family. The news broke like a storm. "The 36,000 pounds rattle that Princess Charlotte never got," the headlines screamed. The public was fascinated by the glimpse into the arcane world of royal gift-giving. Some were outraged on Charlotte's behalf, arguing that it was a gift, not a bribe. Others praised Kate for her adherence to principle and for putting the integrity of the institution above personal gain. The story was everywhere, filling the airwaves and the internet with debate. For the first time, the full picture emerged, the why behind the confiscation that James had witnessed a decade ago. He read the articles with a strange sense of closure. He finally understood. There was no conspiracy, no hidden threat, just a simple, unwavering rule, applied with quiet dignity. In the end, and the story of the intercepted gift became a small but telling chapter in the larger narrative of the modern monarchy. It highlighted the constant tightrope the royals walk, balancing public affection with institutional duty. The magnificent rattle, a symbol of the company's gratitude, was returned, its fate unknown, perhaps sitting in a vault, perhaps melted down, perhaps displayed in a private collection. But its journey into the palace had been stopped by a single man's intuition, on a guard who trusted his gut over protocol. Sergeant James Holloway never received a medal, never got a public commendation. He simply went back to standing guard, his eyes fixed forward, watching the tourists and the rain. But he knew. He knew that on a quiet morning, years ago, a feeling had been right. And in protecting the crown, he had protected a little piece of its future. The world would move on to the next royal story, the next scandal, the next fascination. And Kate Middleton would go on to raise her 3 children, navigating the challenges of motherhood in a gilded cage. Prince William would continue his duties, the weight of his future crown heavy on his shoulders. And somewhere in the vast, echoing corridors of Buckingham Palace, a plain brown package had arrived and disappeared, leaving behind only a faint echo of a story, a testament to the invisible guardians who watch over the crown, and the quiet, unbreakable rules that keep it safe.